There will be a day when everything feels heavy. Your hands will shake, your chest will feel tight. You'll want to stop, sit down, and let the world win. This is that moment for so many people right now, listening to these very words. But here's the truth, nobody tells you enough. The people who win aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who get back up one more time than they fell down. Today, we're going to talk about something real, not fake motivation, not empty words. We're going to talk about what it actually takes to keep moving when your legs feel like they can't carry you anymore. You'll hear about the small habits that build unstoppable strength. You'll learn how to turn your pain into fuel instead of letting it bury you. And by the end, you'll understand exactly what separates people who quit from people who break through. If you've ever felt like giving up, like the fight is too big and you're too tired, stay with me. This is for you. Every word in the next few minutes could change how you see your struggle and maybe even change your life. So take a breath, get comfortable, and let's begin. Chapter 1. Discover the hidden strength waiting inside you right now. There is a moment that happens to every person, usually late at night or early in the morning, when the world goes quiet and a single question rises up from somewhere deep inside the chest. The question sounds simple, but it carries the weight of a lifetime. Do I have what it takes? Maybe you have felt this moment after a failure that knocked the wind out of you. Maybe you felt it staring at a bank account that does not match your dreams, or standing in front of a mirror wondering why the person looking back seems tired, unsure, and smaller than the life they imagined living. This moment is not weakness. This moment is the doorway. Because buried underneath the doubt, underneath the exhaustion, underneath every excuse you have ever made for yourself, there is a strength that has never once left you. It has been waiting, patient, silent, untouched by your failures and unimpressed by your fears. That strength does not need to be built from nothing. It needs to be uncovered. Most people spend their entire lives searching outward for power. They look for it in money, in the approval of others, in trophies, in job titles, in the number of people who follow them online. They believe that strength is something given to a person by the world, a reward handed out to the lucky or the naturally talented. This belief is the first lie that must be destroyed if you are going to live the kind of life that refuses to quit. Real strength was never outside of you. It was placed inside you the moment you were born, wired into your nervous system, coded into the same body that healed your cuts without instruction, that kept your heart beating through every heartbreak, that carried you through nights you swore you would not survive. You survived 100% of your worst days so far. That is not luck, that is proof. Think about a time in your life when everything fell apart. Maybe it was the end of a relationship that gutted you. Maybe it was losing a job you depended on to feed your family. Maybe it was a diagnosis, a death, a betrayal, a failure so public that you wanted to disappear. In that moment, did you have a plan? Did you know exactly how you would make it to the other side? Most likely you did not, and yet here you are, reading these words, breathing, alive, still standing. Something inside you refused to let you stay on the ground. Something pulled you back up when logic said to stay down. That something has a name. It is called your hidden strength, and it does not wait for permission to show up. It shows up the moment you decide to stop looking for it outside yourself and start trusting that it has been there the entire time. Here is a truth that the world rarely teaches you. Strength is not the absence of fear, weakness, or doubt. Strength is what happens when you feel all of those things fully and choose to move forward anyway. The person who says they are never afraid is either lying or has never attempted anything worth attempting. Courage is not a feeling. Courage is an action taken in spite of a feeling. Every person you admire, every name written into history books, every quiet hero in your own family who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, felt fear. They felt doubt. They questioned themselves in the dark just like you do. The difference between them and someone who gives up is not the size of their fear, it is the size of their decision to act despite it. So how do you find this strength when it feels buried under years of disappointment? You do not find it by waiting for motivation to strike you like lightning. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unreliable. They show up when they want and disappear exactly when you need them most. Instead, you find your hidden strength through small, deliberate actions, repeated on purpose, especially on the days you do not feel like taking them. Strength is built the same way a blacksmith forges steel, through heat, through pressure, through repeated strikes that would break something weaker. Every hardship you have faced was not there to destroy you. It was there to temper you, to remove the parts of you that were soft and unprepared, and to reveal the parts of you that can withstand anything. Consider the story of a man who lost his business overnight due to circumstances entirely outside his control. Everything he built over 15 years, gone in a matter of weeks. He had every reason to collapse. He had every excuse to blame the economy, blame the people who wronged him, blame the timing, blame anything but himself. Instead, he did something remarkable. He sat down with a blank notebook and wrote a single sentence at the top of the first page. What can I control right now? Not what happened to him, not who was at fault, just what he could control in that exact moment. He listed 3 things: his effort, his attitude, and the next single action he would take. That was it. He did not need a 5-year plan on day 1. He needed one true action, followed by another, followed by another. Within 18 months, he had rebuilt something stronger than what he lost, not because the world became kinder to him, but because he stopped waiting for the world to hand him strength and started using what was already inside him. This is the practical truth you need to hold on to. Strength is not discovered in comfort. It is discovered in the exact moment you think you cannot take one more step, and you take it anyway. That single step is where your hidden power lives. It is not hiding in some future version of yourself who has more money, more time, or more confidence. It is hiding in the person you are right now, waiting to be called upon. To access this strength in your daily life, you need to build a practice, not a wish. Start each morning by asking yourself one honest question. What is one thing I can do today that my future self will thank me for? It does not need to be large. It can be as simple as getting out of bed the moment your alarm rings instead of hitting snooze, sending the difficult message you have been avoiding, going for a walk when your body wants to stay on the couch, or speaking one sentence of encouragement to yourself in the mirror before you leave the house. These actions feel small, almost insignificant, but they are the exact training ground where hidden strength becomes visible strength. Every time you choose discomfort over comfort, you are proving to yourself that you can be trusted. And trust in yourself is the foundation every unstoppable person stands on. There is another practice worth adopting, one used by disciplined thinkers throughout history. At the end of each day, take 5 minutes to reflect honestly. Ask yourself, where did I show strength today, and where did I let fear or comfort win? Do not judge yourself harshly in this reflection. Judgment breeds shame, and shame makes people quit. Instead, treat yourself the way a good coach treats an athlete they believe in. Honest, direct, but always pushing you toward growth rather than punishment. This daily reflection trains your mind to notice your own courage. Most people never notice their own strength because they are too busy noticing their failures. Flip that pattern. Catch yourself being brave, even in small ways, and that bravery will grow because attention feeds whatever it is pointed at. You should also learn to separate your identity from your circumstances. Circumstances change. Bank accounts go up and down. Relationships begin and end. Health improves and declines. If you build your sense of strength on circumstances alone, you will feel powerful one week and hopeless the next. Instead, root your identity in something unshakable, your willingness to keep showing up. A person who keeps showing up, regardless of results, regardless of how they feel, regardless of how long the road seems, is a person who cannot be defeated, only delayed. Defeat is final, delay is temporary. Choose to see every setback as a delay, never a defeat, and your hidden strength will start to feel less hidden and more like the ground you stand on. Understand also that strength does not require you to feel strong. This is one of the most freeing truths available to you. You do not need to feel confident to act with confidence. You do not need to feel brave to do the brave thing. Action creates feeling far more often than feeling creates action. If you wait until you feel ready, you may wait your entire life, because readiness is a feeling that often arrives only after the action has already been taken. So stop waiting to feel strong enough. Act as the strong version of yourself would act, even while your hands are shaking, and the feeling of strength will follow the action, not the other way around. Real-world application matters here, because wisdom without practice is just decoration. This week, choose one area of your life where you have been waiting to feel ready before you act. Perhaps it is starting a new habit, ending something that no longer serves you, applying for a job you feel unqualified for, or having a conversation you have been avoiding out of fear. Do not wait for the fear to disappear. It will not disappear on its own. Instead, take the action while the fear is still present, and let that action become proof to yourself that you are stronger than the voice telling you to wait. Write down the action you completed, no matter how small. Keep a simple list, even on your phone, and every time you add to it, you are building physical evidence of your own hidden strength becoming visible strength. You were not created to spend your life waiting for permission to be powerful. Every excuse you have used, every doubt that has whispered you are not ready, every fear that has convinced you to stay small, none of it has erased what was placed inside you from the very beginning. That strength survived your worst day. It will survive today, and it will survive tomorrow, because it was never dependent on your circumstances in the first place. It was dependent only on your decision to use it. The moment you stop searching outward and start trusting what has been within you the entire time is the moment your life begins to move in a new direction. Not because the world changed, but because you finally stopped waiting for it to. That strength is not coming. It is already here. It has been here the entire time, patient, steady, and ready the second you decide to stand up and use it. Chapter 2. Build unbreakable habits that carry you through every setback. There is a difference between people who change their life for a few weeks and people who change their life forever, and that difference has nothing to do with willpower, talent, or luck. It comes down to one simple truth. The first group relies on motivation, and the second group relies on habit. Motivation is a spark. It flares up bright and hot when you watch an inspiring video, read a powerful quote, or hit a low point that scares you into action. But sparks fade. They cannot survive a long winter of hard days, sick mornings, heartbreak, or exhaustion. Habits, on the other hand, do not need to feel inspired to function. A habit runs quietly in the background of your life, the same way your lungs keep breathing while you sleep. If you want to build a life that survives every setback, you do not need more motivation. You need habits so deeply built into your identity that they continue operating even when your motivation has completely disappeared. Think about brushing your teeth. You do not wake up and debate whether you feel inspired enough to do it. You do not need a pep talk. You simply do it, without thinking, because it has become part of who you are, rather than something you have to decide on every single day. This is the level of automation your most important habits need to reach if you want them to survive real life. Life will not always cooperate with your plans. You will get sick, you will get busy, you will get hurt, disappointed, and distracted. If your progress depends entirely on how you feel in any given moment, your progress will collapse the first time life gets difficult, and life always gets difficult eventually. The people who keep moving forward decade after decade are not the people who never struggle. They are the people whose habits are strong enough to carry them through the struggle without needing permission from their mood. Building an unbreakable habit starts with something most people overlook completely. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. A goal is a destination, a system is the daily process that gets you there. Someone can want to write a book with their whole heart and still never finish it, because wanting is not a system. But someone who commits to writing 300 words every single morning before checking their phone will finish a book almost by accident, simply because the system was built to survive bad days, not just good ones. This is the first shift you need to make. Stop asking yourself what you want to achieve and start asking yourself what small, repeatable action would move you toward that outcome, even on your worst day. The second truth about unbreakable habits is that they must start absurdly small, smaller than your ego wants to admit. Most people fail at building habits because they aim too big too fast. They decide to work out for an hour every day, read 50 pages a night, or completely overhaul their diet overnight, and it works beautifully for exactly 6 days before life interrupts and the entire plan collapses. A habit that only survives on your best days is not a real habit. It is a burst of enthusiasm wearing a disguise. Real habits are built by making the action so small that skipping it feels more effort than doing it. 1 push-up, 1 paragraph, 1 glass of water before coffee, 2 minutes of stretching. This might sound too small to matter, and that is exactly the point. You are not training your body in the beginning, you are training your identity. You are teaching yourself that you are the kind of person who shows up, no matter how small the action, no matter how you feel. Once that identity is proven to yourself through consistency, expanding the habit becomes natural, because you are no longer fighting your own resistance. You are simply continuing something you already believe about yourself. There is a story worth remembering about a woman who wanted to become a runner, but had never run more than a few minutes in her entire adult life. Instead of forcing herself into an ambitious training plan, she made herself a promise that felt almost embarrassing in its simplicity. She would put on her running shoes and step outside her front door every single morning. That was the entire habit. Not run a mile, not run for 30 minutes, just put on the shoes and step outside. Some mornings she stood there for 2 minutes and walked back inside. Other mornings, once she was already outside with her shoes on, she thought, well, I might as well walk to the corner. And once she was at the corner, she thought, I might as well keep going a little further. Within a year, she was running 5 miles at a time, not because she forced herself through sheer willpower, but because she built a habit small enough to survive her worst days, and that survival is what eventually built her strength. This is the quiet secret behind every person who seems unstoppable. Their habits are not fueled by inspiration, they are fueled by identity. Every time you complete a small habit, even a tiny one, you are casting a vote for the type of person you want to become. Missing one day does not erase your progress, but missing repeatedly, without ever recommitting, begins to rewrite your identity in the wrong direction. This is why the goal is never perfection. The goal is to never miss twice in a row. Life will knock you off track. You will skip a workout, forget to journal, sleep through your alarm, or lose your temper after weeks of practicing patience. This does not make you a failure, it makes you human. What determines whether your habit becomes unbreakable is not whether you fall, but how quickly you return. A habit interrupted once is a pause. A habit interrupted repeatedly without return becomes a habit abandoned. To make a habit truly unbreakable, you also need to attach it to something that already exists in your day, rather than hoping you will remember it in the chaos of daily life. This is called stacking, and it works because your brain already has strong neural pathways built around your existing routines. If you want to build a habit of gratitude, do not tell yourself you will remember to practice it sometime during the day. Attach it to something automatic, like the moment your feet hit the floor in the morning or the moment you sit down for your first meal. If you want to build a reading habit, attach it to the moment you get into bed, before you allow yourself to pick up your phone. When a new habit is anchored to an old one, you are not relying on memory or motivation. You are relying on a trigger that already happens every day without fail. Another critical piece of building habits that survive setbacks is designing your environment to make the right choice the easiest choice. Willpower is a limited resource, and relying on it constantly is exhausting and unreliable. But your environment works for you 24 hours a day without ever getting tired. If you want to eat healthier, the discipline is not proven in the moment you are hungry and staring at junk food. The discipline is proven earlier, when you decide what groceries enter your home in the first place. If you want to write every morning, the battle is not fought at 6 a.m. when you are half asleep. It is won the night before, when you set out your notebook and pen where you cannot miss them. Remove friction from the habits you want, and add friction to the habits you want to break. Delete the app. Leave your phone in another room while you sleep. Put your workout clothes next to your bed. These small environmental changes do more heavy lifting than raw willpower ever will. Understand this deeply. Setbacks are not evidence that you are failing. They are evidence that you are alive and attempting something real. Every person who has ever built something meaningful has faced days where their habits felt pointless, where progress felt invisible, where quitting seemed like the more reasonable choice. The difference between the people who eventually succeed and the people who eventually give up is rarely talent. It is almost always the willingness to return to the habit one more time than they wanted to quit. Your habits are not meant to feel exciting every single day. Most days they will feel ordinary, even boring. This is not a sign that something is wrong. This is exactly what unbreakable strength looks like from the inside, quiet, repetitive, and unglamorous, until one day you look back and realize the small actions you almost gave up on have completely transformed your life. Start today with one habit, made so small it feels almost silly, attached to something you already do without thinking, placed in an environment that makes it nearly impossible to avoid. Do not aim for perfect, aim for unbroken. Let your habits become quiet, dependable proof that no matter what setback comes your way, you already know exactly what to do next, because you have practiced showing up long before the hard days ever arrived. Chapter 3. Face your fears and turn them into daily fuel. Fear announces itself the moment you decide to want something. The instant you set a goal that actually matters to you, a voice rises up from somewhere in your chest, tightens your throat, and starts listing every reason you might fail. This is not a malfunction. This is not a sign that something is wrong with you. This is simply what happens to every human being who dares to move towards something meaningful. The tragedy is not that fear shows up. The tragedy is how many people mistake the presence of fear for a stop sign, when in reality it was always meant to be read as a signal that says you are standing at the exact edge of your own growth. Most people spend their entire lives running from fear the same way they would run from a fire, treating it as something dangerous that must be extinguished before life can continue. But fear is not fire. Fear is closer to a compass. It points, with uncomfortable accuracy, toward the exact places where your growth is waiting. The job interview you are terrified of is pointing you toward the career you actually want. The conversation you keep avoiding is pointing you toward the relationship that needs honesty to survive. The business idea that makes your stomach twist every time you think about it is pointing you toward the version of your life you have not yet given yourself permission to build. Fear does not appear randomly. It appears specifically, precisely, right where your potential is asking to be used. Consider what fear actually is on a physical level. Your heart races, your palms sweat, your breathing quickens. Now consider what excitement feels like in your body. Your heart races, your palms sweat, your breathing quickens. The physical sensations of fear and excitement are almost identical. The only difference between them is the story your mind decides to attach to the feeling. This single realization can change the entire trajectory of your life, because it means fear is not something separate from courage. It is the raw material courage is made from. You do not need to wait for the fear to disappear before you become brave. You need to relabel what the fear means. Instead of telling yourself this feeling means danger, start telling yourself this feeling means I am about to do something that matters. There is a story about a young boxer stepping into the ring for the first major fight of his career. Backstage, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely tie his own gloves. A veteran trainer sitting beside him noticed and asked if he was afraid. The young fighter admitted he was terrified, certain that fear would destroy his performance. The trainer said something the fighter never forgot. "Everyone backstage tonight is shaking. The only difference between you and the fighters who lose is that you are going to walk through that curtain anyway." That fighter did walk through the curtain, still shaking, still afraid, and he won. Not because the fear vanished, but because he stopped waiting for it to vanish before taking action. This is the truth almost nobody tells you about brave people. They are not fearless. They have simply learned to move forward with trembling hands instead of waiting for steady ones. To turn fear into daily fuel, the first practical step is learning to name it specifically rather than letting it remain a vague cloud of dread. Vague fear is paralyzing because it feels infinite and unmanageable. Specific fear can be examined, questioned, and often proven far smaller than it first appeared. When you feel afraid, stop and ask yourself exactly what you are afraid of. Not the general feeling, but the precise outcome. Are you afraid of rejection? Are you afraid of looking foolish in front of people whose opinions will not matter to you in 5 years? Are you afraid of failing publicly, or afraid of succeeding and having to live up to a new standard? Write the fear down in one honest sentence. The moment fear is written in plain words, instead of floating around as a formless feeling in your chest, it shrinks. It becomes something you can actually work with, instead of something that works you into paralysis. Once the fear is named, ask yourself a second question that carries enormous power. What is the worst realistic outcome, and could I survive it? Notice the word realistic. Fear loves to exaggerate, painting catastrophic pictures that have almost no basis in reality. If you are afraid to start a business, your mind may quietly whisper that failure means total ruin, public humiliation, and permanent proof that you are not good enough. But if you actually examine the realistic worst outcome, it is usually something far more survivable. You lose some time, some money, and you learn valuable lessons that make your next attempt stronger. Almost every fear, when examined honestly instead of emotionally, reveals itself to be survivable. And once you know you can survive the worst outcome, fear loses its grip on your decision-making, because you are no longer negotiating with an imaginary monster, you are negotiating with a real, manageable risk. The next step in transforming fear into fuel is understanding the difference between fear that protects you and fear that limits you. Some fear exists for good reason. The fear you feel standing too close to the edge of a cliff is protecting your physical body from real danger, and you should listen to it. But the fear you feel before speaking in public, before starting something new, before pursuing a dream that feels too big, is rarely protecting you from actual danger. It is protecting your comfort. It is trying to keep you inside the boundaries of what is familiar, because familiar feels safe, even when familiar is slowly making you miserable. Learn to ask yourself, is this fear protecting my body, or is this fear protecting my comfort? If it is protecting your comfort, that is precisely the fear you need to walk directly into. Turning fear into daily fuel also requires a shift in how you use the energy fear creates. Fear floods your body with adrenaline, the same chemical that fuels intense physical performance. Most people waste this adrenaline by using it to freeze, to overthink, to spiral into anxious loops of imagined disaster. But that same surge of energy can be redirected into action. The moment you feel your heart pounding before a difficult conversation, a big presentation, or a decision that could change your life, do not wait for the feeling to calm down before acting. Move while the fear is present. Send the message while your hands are still shaking. Walk into the room while your stomach is still in knots. The action itself will absorb the nervous energy far more effectively than sitting still ever could, and on the other side of that action, you will almost always find that the fear was worse in anticipation than in reality. Make fear part of your daily practice, rather than something you only confront during major life decisions. Each day, look for one small moment where fear shows up and choose to move through it instead of around it. This might be as small as speaking up in a meeting when your instinct is to stay quiet, making the phone call you have been putting off, or admitting to someone that you were wrong about something. These daily repetitions matter more than the occasional big leap, because courage is a skill built through repetition, the same way physical strength is built through consistent training rather than a single dramatic effort. Every time you choose to act despite fear, you are proving to your own nervous system that fear is survivable, and that proof accumulates over time into a kind of quiet, unshakable confidence that no motivational speech could ever hand you. There will be days when fear feels larger than usual, when the stakes feel higher and the voice in your head grows louder. On those days, remind yourself of every previous fear you have already walked through and survived. You have been afraid before. You are still here. The pattern of your life so far proves that fear has never actually stopped you from surviving. It has only tried to stop you from growing. Do not wait for fear to leave before you begin. Let it walk beside you instead. Treat it as proof that you are standing exactly where growth lives, and use its energy to move forward one honest, trembling step at a time, until the very thing that once made you afraid becomes the thing that made you unstoppable. Chapter 4. Silence the inner critic stealing your confidence every single day. There is a voice that lives inside every person's head, one that speaks more often than any other voice you will hear in your lifetime, and for most people, that voice is cruel. It tells you that you are not smart enough, not disciplined enough, not talented enough, not ready enough. It compares your beginning to someone else's middle. It replays your embarrassing moments on a loop while conveniently forgetting your victories. It whispers that people are judging you when they are usually far too busy worrying about their own inner critic to notice you at all. This voice feels like the truth because it speaks in first person, using the word I instead of you, which makes it nearly impossible to separate from your actual identity. But here is something you need to understand clearly. That voice is not who you are. That voice is a habit of thought, and like any habit, it can be interrupted, weakened, and eventually replaced. The inner critic did not appear out of nowhere. It was built, piece by piece, out of criticism you absorbed from teachers, parents, classmates, failed relationships, and moments of public embarrassment that felt far bigger in your memory than they actually were in reality. Somewhere along the way, you began repeating those old criticisms to yourself before anyone else even had the chance to say them, believing that if you attacked yourself first, it would somehow hurt less when life delivered its own blows. This is a survival strategy, not a character flaw. Your mind believed it was protecting you by keeping expectations low and criticism constant. But protection that keeps you small is not protection at all. It is a cage built from good intentions, and the only way out is recognizing that the voice is not trying to help you anymore. It is trying to keep you comfortable, and comfort is not the same thing as growth. The first step in silencing this voice is learning to catch it in the act. Most people never examine their inner critic because they are too busy believing it. The thought arrives, I am going to fail at this, and instead of questioning it, the mind accepts it as fact and adjusts behavior accordingly, often by not trying at all. Begin paying attention to the exact moments this voice speaks. Notice when you are about to attempt something new and a thought arrives that sounds like judgment rather than guidance. The moment you notice it, give it a name, even something as simple as calling it the critic. This small act of naming creates distance. It transforms the voice from being you into being something you are simply listening to, the same way you might listen to a radio station you did not choose but can absolutely choose to turn down. Once you notice the critic speaking, the next step is questioning its evidence the way you would question a witness in a courtroom who has a history of lying. When the voice says you always mess things up, ask yourself directly, is that actually true, or is that an old story I have repeated so many times it started to feel like fact? Search for specific evidence. Most of the time, you will find that the critic deals in absolutes, Words like always, never, everyone, and nobody, and absolutes rarely survive close examination. You did not always mess things up. You have succeeded at things before, more times than the critic wants you to remember, because the critic has a convenient habit of erasing your wins from memory, while keeping every failure in permanent, vivid storage. There is a story worth remembering about a young writer who submitted her work to publisher after publisher, only to be rejected more than 20 times. Each rejection fed her inner critic new material, until the voice inside her head grew so loud she nearly stopped writing altogether. One evening, instead of listening to that voice as fact, she decided to write down exactly what it was saying, word for word, on a piece of paper. Reading it back, she realized the voice sounded nothing like encouragement or honest feedback. It sounded like an enemy trying to defeat her before the world even had the chance. Seeing the words on paper, separated from her own mind, gave her the distance she needed to recognize the voice was not protecting her, it was sabotaging her. She kept writing. Her 21st submission was accepted. The difference was not that her talent suddenly improved overnight. The difference was that she stopped treating a cruel internal voice as an accurate prediction of her future. A powerful daily practice for silencing the inner critic is replacing self-judgment with self-coaching. When you make a mistake, notice how quickly your mind reaches for insults, calling yourself stupid, careless, or incapable. Now imagine speaking to a close friend who made that exact same mistake. You would not call them worthless. You would likely point out what went wrong, offer perspective, and remind them that one mistake does not define their entire ability. Begin extending that same voice to yourself. This is not about empty positivity or pretending mistakes do not matter. It is about speaking to yourself the way a good coach speaks to an athlete they believe in, honest about what needs improvement, but never cruel, because cruelty has never once made a person perform better. It only makes them afraid to try again. Another practical tool is creating what could be called an evidence file, a simple, ongoing list of your actual accomplishments, compliments you have received, challenges you have overcome, and moments you were proud of yourself. Keep this list somewhere accessible, whether in a notebook or on your phone. The inner critic thrives on selective memory, conveniently forgetting your strengths while highlighting your weaknesses. When the critic speaks loudly, telling you that you are not capable, pull out your evidence file and read through it. This is not arrogance. This is simply balancing an unfair internal narrative with actual facts about who you are and what you have already proven yourself capable of doing. Understand also that confidence is not the absence of self-doubt. It is action taken despite self-doubt, repeated so consistently that self-doubt eventually grows quieter, simply because it stops getting the reaction it used to get. Every time you complete a task, despite the critic telling you not to bother, you weaken its authority a little more. Confidence is built the same way trust is built between two people, through repeated proof over time, not through a single decision to suddenly believe in yourself. Some days the critic will be loud, and that is fine. You do not need to defeat it completely to move forward. You only need to act louder than it speaks, one honest step at a time, until its voice becomes something you notice in the background, rather than something that controls the direction of your entire life. The version of you that the critic keeps trying to shrink is the exact version capable of extraordinary things, and every day you choose to act despite that voice, you are proving, one small decision at a time, exactly who is actually in charge. Chapter 5. Transform failure into the greatest teacher you will ever have. Every person who has ever built something meaningful has a graveyard behind them, filled with failed attempts, rejected ideas, broken plans, and moments they would rather forget. What separates the people who eventually succeed from the people who quietly give up is not the size of that graveyard. It is what they chose to do while standing in it. Most people treat failure like a verdict, a final judgment on their worth and their potential. But failure was never meant to be read as a verdict. It was meant to be read as a lesson, written in a language most people never learn to understand, because they are too busy feeling ashamed to actually listen to what the failure is trying to teach them. Think about how a child learns to walk. They do not stand up once, fall down, and decide walking is not for them. They fall dozens, sometimes hundreds of times, and each fall provides tiny pieces of information their body uses to adjust balance, strength, and coordination. No one looks at a toddler falling and calls them a failure. Everyone understands that falling is simply part of the process of learning to walk. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, this understanding gets buried under fear of judgment, and falling stops being seen as part of the process and starts being seen as proof that we should not have tried in the first place. Relearning how to fail the way a child falls, without shame, without giving up, treating each stumble as information rather than identity, is one of the most powerful shifts you can make in your entire life. Consider the story of an inventor who attempted to create a working light bulb. He failed thousands of times before finding a design that worked. When a reporter asked how it felt to fail so many times, he responded that he had not failed at all. He had simply found thousands of ways that did not work, which brought him closer to the one way that would. This is not clever wordplay. This is a completely different operating system for how to interpret setbacks. Most people experience failure and immediately ask, "What is wrong with me?" The people who eventually succeed experience failure and instead ask, "What is this attempt teaching me that I did not know before?" The exact same event, viewed through two different questions, produces two completely different futures. One question leads to shame and quitting. The other leads to adjustment and improvement. The first practical step in transforming failure into a teacher is separating the event from your identity. When something fails, whether it is a business idea, a relationship, an exam, or a goal you work toward for months, your mind will instinctively try to turn that failure into a statement about who you are. The business failed becomes, "I am a failure." The relationship ended becomes, "I am unlovable." The exam went poorly becomes, "I am not smart enough." Notice how quickly an event transforms into an identity, and refuse to let that transformation happen unchallenged. An event is something that happened. An identity is something you decide about yourself. You always have the power to separate the two, even when your emotions are screaming at you to combine them. Once you have separated the event from your identity, the next step is conducting an honest, unemotional review of what actually happened, similar to how a pilot reviews flight data after a rough landing, not to assign blame, but to understand exactly what conditions led to the outcome so that adjustments can be made for the next flight. Ask yourself specific questions. What decisions did I make that contributed to this outcome? What information did I not have that I now have? What would I do differently if I attempted this again tomorrow? Write the answers down. This process turns a vague, painful memory into a specific, usable strategy, and specific strategies are far more valuable than vague pain, because pain fades and gets forgotten, but a written lesson can be referred back to for the rest of your life. There is a story about a salesperson who lost what would have been the biggest deal of her career after months of work, due to a single moment of overconfidence during her final presentation. She could have quit the industry entirely, and for a few days she seriously considered it. Instead, she sat down and wrote out, in painful detail, every single moment of that presentation, identifying the exact point where she had stopped listening to the client and started simply trying to close the deal. That one written insight, treating the presentation not as proof she was bad at her job, but as data about a specific mistake she could correct, changed the way she approached every future meeting. Within 2 years, she became one of the top performers in her entire company, not because she avoided failure afterward, but because she had learned exactly how to extract value from it. A crucial part of transforming failure into growth is managing the emotional response that arrives before the lesson can even be considered. Failure often triggers shame, and shame is one of the most dangerous emotions because it convinces people to hide rather than examine. When shame takes over, the instinct is to avoid thinking about what happened, to distract yourself, or to quit the entire pursuit just to escape the discomfort. Give yourself permission to feel disappointed, even sad, for a limited period of time, but set a boundary on it. Allow yourself one day, one evening, one designated period to feel the weight of what happened fully, and then make a decision to move from feeling into examining. This is not about suppressing emotion. It is about not allowing emotion to become a permanent residence. Another useful practice is keeping what could be called a failure journal, a place where you record not just what went wrong, but specifically what you learned and what you will do differently. Over time, this journal becomes one of the most valuable things you own, because it transforms scattered, painful memories into an organized record of growth. Reading back through old entries after months or years often reveals something remarkable, patterns you could not see while you were living through them, mistakes that repeated themselves until you finally learned the lesson deeply enough to stop making them. This journal proves, in your own handwriting, that failure was never the end of your story. It was simply an early chapter that taught you what you needed to know for the chapters still ahead. Understand also that the people you admire most, the ones who seem to have everything figured out, are not people who avoided failure. They are people who failed more than most others were even willing to attempt in the first place. Success is often less about avoiding mistakes and more about being willing to make more attempts than the average person is willing to make, because more attempts naturally include more failures, and more failures, examined honestly, produce more lessons than someone who plays it safe will ever collect. If you want an extraordinary life, you must be willing to accumulate an extraordinary number of failures along the way, not because failure is the goal, but because it is the unavoidable tuition paid on the road toward anything worth achieving. The next time something falls apart, resist the urge to ask what is wrong with me, and instead ask what is this teaching me. Treat every failure as a report handed to you by life itself, filled with specific, valuable information about what to adjust before your next attempt. Do not bury the report in shame. Read it, study it, apply it, and then take the next attempt forward, carrying not the weight of what went wrong, but the wisdom of exactly what to do differently, because that wisdom, collected one failure at a time, is what eventually builds a person who cannot be stopped, only sharpened. Chapter 6. Create a morning routine that fuels unstoppable daily progress. The way you spend the first 30 minutes of your day rarely stays contained to just those 30 minutes. It sets a tone that follows you into every meeting, every conversation, every decision you make, until your head hits the pillow again that night. Most people do not realize this until they examine the pattern closely. Wake up late, reach immediately for a phone, scroll through other people's highlight reels while still lying in bed, rush through the morning in a slight panic, and arrive at the first real task of the day, already feeling behind. That feeling of being behind does not disappear once the morning ends. It quietly colors the rest of the day, making everything feel slightly more rushed, slightly more reactive, slightly more like survival than intention. A strong morning does the opposite. It builds momentum before the world has a chance to demand anything from you, and that momentum carries forward into everything else you do. The reason mornings hold so much power is simple. They are the only part of the day almost entirely within your control. By the afternoon, your schedule belongs partly to other people, other obligations, and other people's emergencies. But the moments right after you wake up belong completely to you, before anyone else is awake enough to interrupt them. Whoever controls the first hour of the day controls the emotional and mental foundation the rest of the day gets built on. If you spend that hour reacting to notifications, emails, and other people's demands, you hand over control of your entire mindset before you have even had the chance to claim it for yourself. Building a morning routine does not mean copying someone else's exact schedule and hoping it magically transforms your life. It means understanding the handful of core elements that create momentum and then building your own version around your specific life, responsibilities, and energy levels. The goal is never to perform an elaborate routine for the sake of looking disciplined. The goal is to walk into your day already feeling clear, grounded, and one step ahead instead of scrambling to catch up. The first element worth protecting is the space between waking up and picking up your phone. This gap seems small, but it carries enormous weight. The moment you check a phone first thing in the morning, you are allowing the outside world, other people's opinions, bad news, comparison, and other people's priorities to be the very first input your mind receives for the day. Your brain is at its most impressionable state right after waking, and whatever you feed it first tends to set the emotional tone for hours afterward. Protecting even 10 or 15 minutes before touching a phone gives your own thoughts, rather than the internet's, the first say in how your day begins. The second element is movement, even in small doses. This does not require an intense workout if that is not realistic for your life right now. It can be as simple as stretching for a few minutes, walking around the block, or doing a short set of exercises before sitting down for the day. Movement in the morning does something powerful to the body and mind. It signals wakefulness far more effectively than caffeine alone, increases circulation, and creates a small sense of accomplishment before the day has even officially started. There is something psychologically important about completing one small physical challenge, even something as simple as 10 squats, before you have eaten breakfast. It proves to your own mind, in a very physical way, that you follow through on what you say you will do, and that proof carries into every other commitment you make for the rest of the day. The third element, often overlooked, is a moment of clarity, some form of quiet reflection or planning before the noise of the day begins. This might look like writing down the 3 most important tasks for the day, sitting in silence for a few minutes, or simply asking yourself what would make today feel successful by the time you go to sleep tonight. Without this moment of clarity, most people drift through their day, reacting to whatever feels most urgent, rather than what is actually most important. Urgent and important are not the same thing, and without a clear morning moment to separate them, urgent almost always wins, leaving important tasks pushed aside day after day until months pass and nothing meaningful has moved forward. Consider the story of a man who spent years feeling perpetually exhausted and behind, despite working long hours every single day. He assumed the solution was working even more, waking up earlier just to squeeze in extra hours of the same reactive pattern, checking messages first thing, rushing through breakfast, arriving at work already stressed. Nothing changed until he made one small adjustment. Instead of reaching for his phone the moment he woke up, he spent the first 20 minutes of his day writing 3 sentences: what he was grateful for, what his single most important task was that day, and one thing he was looking forward to. Nothing else about his schedule changed. He did not suddenly have more hours in the day, but those 20 minutes gave him something he had been missing for years, a sense of direction before the chaos of the day took over. Within a few months, colleagues began noticing he seemed calmer, more focused, less reactive in meetings. The external circumstances of his job had not changed. His internal starting point had. A morning routine also needs to be realistic, or it will collapse the same way any habit built on unrealistic expectations eventually collapses. If your current mornings involve rushing out the door with barely enough time to get dressed, do not attempt to suddenly add an hour of meditation, exercise, journaling, and reading all at once. Start with one single addition, even 5 minutes, and let it become consistent before adding anything else. The strength of a morning routine is not measured by how impressive it looks from the outside. It is measured by how reliably you actually do it, especially on the mornings you do not feel like doing anything at all. It is worth acknowledging that not every morning will go as planned. Some days you will oversleep, some days a family emergency, a sick child, or an unexpected obligation will completely disrupt whatever routine you have built. This does not mean your routine has failed. It means life happened, which it will continue to do regardless of how disciplined you become. The measure of a strong morning routine is not perfect, uninterrupted consistency. It is how quickly you return to it after being knocked off course. One missed morning does not undo months of progress. What undoes progress is treating one missed morning as evidence that the entire effort was pointless and quietly abandoning something that was actually working. The way you begin your morning is a quiet, repeated statement to yourself about what kind of day you intend to have and what kind of person you are becoming. It is not about perfection, elaborate rituals, or waking up at an impressive hour to impress people who will never actually see your mornings. It is about claiming the first part of your day for your own intentions before the world gets the chance to claim it for you. Protect that window of time. Fill it with movement, clarity, and a few minutes of silence before the noise begins, and watch how the rest of your day, and eventually your entire life, begins to move with a steadiness that reacting to chaos could never provide. Chapter 7. Surround yourself with people who push you toward greatness. You become, over time, an average of the people you spend the most time with. This is not a motivational exaggeration. It is something you can observe in nearly every area of life if you look closely enough. Notice how people who spend years around negativity slowly start speaking in complaints without realizing it. Notice how people surrounded by ambition start setting bigger goals almost without trying. Notice how habits, speech patterns, spending decisions, and even emotional reactions tend to spread between people who spend consistent time together, the same way a mood can spread through a room without a single word being spoken. If this is true, and it is, then one of the most powerful decisions you will ever make is not what goals you set, but who you allow closest to your daily life while you pursue them. Most people never examine their circle with this level of honesty because it feels uncomfortable. It is far easier to blame a lack of progress on circumstances, timing, or personal discipline than to admit that some of the people closest to you might be quietly pulling you backward. But the truth deserves to be said plainly. You cannot consistently rise while staying tightly connected to people who resent your growth, mock your ambition, or feel threatened every time you try to improve. This does not mean cutting people off carelessly or treating relationships as disposable tools for personal advancement. It means becoming aware, honestly and without denial, of how the people around you are actually influencing the direction of your life. There is an old idea worth examining closely. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Whether the exact number is scientifically precise matters less than the principle behind it. Think about the people who currently occupy the most space in your daily life. Do they challenge you to think bigger, or do they quietly encourage you to stay comfortable? Do they celebrate your wins genuinely, or does their enthusiasm feel forced, followed by subtle comments that shrink your excitement? Do they hold you accountable to the person you say you want to become, or do they laugh off your goals as unrealistic the moment you mention them out loud? These questions are uncomfortable, but discomfort is often the exact signal that something important needs to be examined rather than avoided. Consider the story of 2 brothers who grew up in the exact same household, facing nearly identical circumstances. One brother surrounded himself, throughout his 20s, with friends who were focused, driven, and constantly working towards something meaningful. The other brother, without any single dramatic decision, gradually spent more time with people who treated ambition as something to mock, who filled evenings with complaints about how unfair life was, rather than conversations about what to do next. 10 years later, their lives looked completely different, not because one brother was smarter or more talented than the other, but because one had been surrounded daily by people pulling him upward, while the other had been surrounded daily by people who, often without realizing it themselves, kept pulling him back down to their own level of comfort. Environment did not determine their outcome by force. It determined their outcome through thousands of small, repeated influences that accumulated quietly over years. This does not mean every relationship in your life needs to be transactional or strategically chosen based on what someone can offer your ambitions. Real friendship, real family bonds, and real love matter deeply, and no amount of ambition should convince you to abandon people simply because they are not currently chasing the same goals you are. What matters is honesty about influence rather than intention. Someone can love you deeply and still, through years of shared comfort, quietly discourage you from growing beyond what feels familiar to them. This is rarely malicious. Often, people who discourage your growth are unconsciously afraid that your change means they will be left behind, or that your progress will highlight areas of their own life they have avoided examining. Understanding this can help you approach the situation with compassion rather than resentment, while still protecting your own direction with clarity. The practical first step in building a stronger circle is conducting an honest audit of your current relationships, not to judge anyone, but simply to notice patterns. After spending time with certain people, do you generally feel inspired, energized, and clearer about your goals, or do you feel slightly smaller, more doubtful, and less motivated than before? Pay attention to this pattern over several weeks rather than judging based on a single interaction, since everyone has bad days, regardless of how supportive they generally are. What you are looking for is a consistent pattern, not an isolated moment. Once you notice these patterns, you do not need to make dramatic announcements or confrontations. Growth in relationships often happens through gradual redirection of time and energy, rather than sudden, dramatic exits. This might mean spending slightly less time with people who consistently drain your motivation, while intentionally investing more time in relationships, even new ones, with people who reflect the mindset you are trying to build. This could mean joining a group, community, or professional circle centered around your goals, whether that is a fitness community, a group of entrepreneurs, a writing circle, or simply one or two friends who share your commitment to growth. Surrounding yourself with the right people does not always mean removing the wrong ones immediately. It often means diluting their influence by adding new voices into your life that reflect where you are trying to go, rather than where you have already been. It is also worth understanding that greatness attracts greatness, but only once you begin showing up as the kind of person worth being surrounded by. If you want deeper, more driven relationships in your life, the fastest way to attract them is not to search endlessly for the perfect group of ambitious people, but to become someone whose daily actions naturally draw those people toward you. Disciplined people are drawn to other disciplined people. Ambitious people notice other ambitious people, often before a single word is exchanged, simply through the way someone carries themselves, follows through on commitments, and speaks about their goals with quiet seriousness rather than empty talk. As you build stronger habits and clearer direction in your own life, you will likely notice your circle naturally shifting, sometimes without any deliberate effort at all, because people who are growing tend to gravitate toward each other the same way people who are stagnant tend to gravitate toward each other. Mentorship deserves particular attention here, because one of the fastest ways to accelerate your own growth is spending time, even indirectly, around people who are already further along the path you want to walk. This does not always require a formal mentor relationship. It can mean reading the words of people who have accomplished what you hope to accomplish, listening to how they think through problems, or simply asking someone you respect for 15 minutes of their time to ask specific, thoughtful questions. Most successful people remember someone who gave them access, advice, or encouragement at a critical moment, and most successful people are more willing to offer that same access than people assume, as long as the request is specific, respectful, and shows genuine effort rather than simply asking them to solve your problems for you. Building the right circle is not a one-time decision. It is an ongoing practice of paying attention, protecting your energy, and intentionally choosing proximity to people who reflect the standards you are trying to reach. Some relationships will need distance, others will need investment. New relationships will need to be sought out deliberately rather than left entirely to chance. None of this happens by accident, and none of it happens overnight. but the compound effect of who you allow into your daily life will shape your trajectory more powerfully than almost any other single decision you make. Choose people who see the person you are becoming, even before you fully see it yourself, and let their belief, their standards, and their example become one more force pulling you steadily toward the life you are building. Chapter 8. Push through exhaustion when quitting feels like the only option. There comes a point on almost every meaningful journey when the excitement of the beginning has completely worn off, the distance to the goal still feels impossibly far, and the body and mind both feel like they have nothing left to give. This is the point where most people quit, not because they lack ability, not because their goal was wrong, but simply because exhaustion convinced them that stopping was the only reasonable option left. Understanding this moment, recognizing it for what it actually is, rather than what it feels like in the middle of it, might be one of the most important skills separating people who eventually reach their goals from people who abandon them just before the breakthrough would have arrived. Exhaustion has a way of distorting judgment. When the body is depleted and the mind is worn thin, everything starts to feel more permanent, more hopeless, and more impossible than it actually is. A setback that would normally feel manageable suddenly feels catastrophic. A delay that would normally feel like a minor inconvenience suddenly feels like proof the entire effort was pointless. This is not a sign that your goal was wrong or that you are not capable of achieving it. It is simply what exhaustion does to perception. The mind, when depleted, searches for the fastest way to relieve discomfort, and quitting often presents itself as the fastest relief available, even when it is not actually the wisest decision available. There is a story about a long-distance swimmer who attempted to cross a wide, cold channel of open water. Partway through the swim, thick fog rolled in, and she could no longer see the shore ahead of her. Exhausted, cold, and unable to see any evidence of progress, she began to believe the crossing was impossible and asked to be pulled from the water. She stopped swimming less than a mile from the shore she could not see. Months later, she attempted the same swim again, this time with a boat beside her, someone reminding her exactly how far she had already come, even when the fog rolled in and she could not see the destination herself. She finished. The distance had not changed between the two attempts. What changed was her ability to keep moving, even when she could not see proof of how close she actually was. This story reveals something essential about exhaustion. It often strikes hardest right before a breakthrough, precisely because you cannot see how close you actually are to the result you have been working toward. The mind interprets an unclear path as an impossible one, when in reality, unclear simply means unclear, not impossible. Some of the most significant breakthroughs in business, health, relationships, and personal growth happen shortly after a person's motivation had completely run out, in the exact moments they kept moving anyway, purely on discipline rather than desire. The first practical tool for pushing through genuine exhaustion is learning to separate physical exhaustion from mental exhaustion, because they require completely different responses. Physical exhaustion, real depletion of the body from lack of sleep, poor nutrition, or genuine overwork, requires rest, not force. Ignoring physical exhaustion and pushing through it repeatedly leads to burnout, illness, and eventually a complete collapse that sets you back far more than a period of proper rest ever would. But mental exhaustion, the kind that whispers "this is too hard, I do not feel like continuing, this does not matter enough to keep going," often responds differently. Mental exhaustion frequently loosens its grip the moment you take even a small action despite it, because action interrupts the spiral of overthinking that mental exhaustion feeds on. Learning to correctly identify which type of exhaustion you are experiencing prevents you from either forcing your body past a genuine limit or giving up on something your mind was simply trying to talk you out of. A second practical tool is shrinking the goal down to something manageable in the exact moment exhaustion hits hardest, when the full weight of an unfinished project, a difficult season, or a long-term goal feels overwhelming. Thinking about the entire distance remaining almost guarantees the feeling of hopelessness will win. Instead, Narrow your focus down to the smallest possible next action. Not finishing the entire project, just opening the document. Not completing the entire workout, just putting on your shoes and doing 5 minutes. Not solving the entire problem, just making the next phone call. This shrinking of focus does not ignore the larger goal, it simply refuses to let the size of the larger goal paralyze the very next step that is actually within reach right now. Consider also the value of remembering your reason, the deeper motivation underneath the goal itself, especially during the exact moments quitting feels tempting. Surface-level motivation, wanting to look good, wanting quick results, wanting recognition, tends to evaporate the moment things get difficult. Deeper motivation, providing for people you love, proving something meaningful to yourself, building a life that reflects your values rather than your fears, tends to remain even when everything else feels depleted. When exhaustion hits, pause and ask yourself honestly why this goal mattered to you in the first place, before the fatigue set in. Often, reconnecting with that original reason provides just enough renewed strength to take the next small step forward, even without the burst of motivation you started with. There is also enormous value in recognizing exhaustion as temporary rather than permanent, even though it rarely feels temporary in the moment. Emotions and physical states shift constantly, even when circumstances stay the same. The overwhelming feeling of wanting to quit at 10 at night after a brutal, draining day often looks completely different by morning, after sleep, food, and a few hours of distance from the immediate stress. This does not mean every difficult feeling should simply be ignored until it passes. It means learning to distrust major, permanent decisions made during temporary, exhausted states. A helpful practice is delaying any decision to quit something meaningful by at least 24 hours whenever possible, giving your body and mind time to recover before making a choice that could affect the rest of your life. Rest itself deserves to be understood correctly here, because pushing through exhaustion does not mean refusing to ever rest. Rest, taken intentionally, is not the same thing as quitting. Quitting is abandoning the goal entirely. Rest is temporarily stepping back in order to return stronger. Confusing these two concepts causes many people to either burn themselves out completely by refusing all rest, or to quit entirely by mistaking exhaustion as proof the goal was never meant to be theirs. Give yourself permission to rest without giving yourself permission to abandon what actually matters to you. A short pause, a full night of sleep, a day away from the project. These things replenish the exact strength you need to keep going, while quitting removes the possibility of ever finishing at all. Every person who has accomplished something meaningful has stood exactly where you might be standing right now, depleted, uncertain, and tempted to walk away from something that once felt exciting and now simply feels heavy. The difference between the people who eventually reach the other side and the people who turn back is rarely the absence of exhaustion. It is the decision to take one more small step despite it, to trust that the fog covering the shore does not mean the shore has disappeared, and to keep moving, even slowly, even imperfectly, until the exhaustion lifts and the progress you could not see becomes undeniable. Chapter 9. Celebrate small wins that build momentum toward your victory. Most people wait for the finish line to feel proud of themselves, believing that celebration should be saved for the moment the entire goal is complete, the entire dream is realized, the entire mountain is climbed. This single belief quietly destroys more motivation than almost any other mindset people carry into their long-term goals. If pride and satisfaction are only allowed to exist at the very end of a journey, then the entire middle of that journey, which is where most of life actually happens, becomes a stretch of time filled with nothing but pressure, delayed gratification, and a nagging sense that nothing counts until everything is finished. This is exhausting, and exhaustion, sustained long enough without relief, is exactly what causes people to quit long before they ever reach the ending they were working so hard toward. Small wins are not consolation prizes for people who have not yet achieved something big. Small wins are the actual building blocks of every big achievement that has ever existed. No one wakes up one morning and instantly becomes an expert, builds a thriving business, or transforms their health overnight. Every enormous accomplishment is simply the accumulation of thousands of smaller moments, most of which went completely unnoticed and uncelebrated by the person living through them. Learning to notice and celebrate these smaller moments does not distract from the larger goal. It fuels the exact energy required to keep moving toward it. There is a well-documented pattern among people who study motivation closely. Progress, even small progress, is one of the most powerful drivers of continued effort that exists. When people can see evidence that their actions are actually working, even in a tiny way, their motivation increases. When people cannot see any evidence of progress, even if progress is technically happening beneath the surface, motivation collapses, regardless of how much real effort is being put in. This means that visibility of progress matters almost as much as progress itself. If you never pause to notice and acknowledge the small steps forward you have already taken, your mind will default to feeling like nothing has changed, even when quite a lot actually has. Consider the story of a man learning a new language as an adult, something notoriously difficult and slow. In the early months, he felt embarrassed by how little he understood, frustrated that basic conversation still felt impossible after weeks of daily practice. He nearly quit multiple times, convinced he simply did not have the ability that came naturally to others. A friend suggested he start keeping a small notebook, not to track mistakes, but to write down one thing each day that he understood or said correctly that he could not have managed a month earlier. At first, the entries felt almost silly in their smallness. Understood a stranger's question without translating in his head, ordered food without hesitating, followed part of a conversation between two native speakers. But reading back through weeks of these small entries revealed something his emotions alone could never have shown him. Undeniable, visible proof of progress. That evidence became the fuel that carried him through the much harder, much slower months that followed, eventually leading to real fluency years later. The first practical step in building this habit is deciding, deliberately, what counts as a small win in whatever area of your life you are trying to improve. Many people skip this step entirely, which means they never notice their wins because they never defined what a win actually looks like in the first place. If your goal is improving your health, a small win might be choosing water over a sugary drink, walking for 15 minutes, or preparing one meal at home instead of ordering food. If your goal is building a business, a small win might be a single new customer, an improved product, or simply finishing a task you had been avoiding for weeks. Write down, specifically, what small progress looks like in your particular pursuit, so that when it happens, even quietly, you actually notice it instead of letting it pass by unacknowledged. Once you know what to look for, the next step is building a consistent practice of recording these wins somewhere real, rather than trusting your memory to hold on to them. Memory is unreliable, especially under stress, and especially when your inner critic is working overtime to highlight everything that went wrong instead. A simple list, whether in a notebook or on your phone, where you write down one small win at the end of each day, creates a growing, undeniable record of forward motion. On difficult days, when discouragement convinces you that nothing has improved and nothing ever will, this list becomes tangible evidence that contradicts that feeling with actual facts rather than assumptions. Celebrating small wins does not require elaborate rewards or grand gestures. In fact, the celebration matters far less than the acknowledgement itself. Simply pausing for a moment, mentally or out loud, saying to yourself that you did something well, that you moved forward even slightly, creates a psychological signal that reinforces the behavior you want to continue. This is not about seeking constant praise or becoming dependent on external validation. It is about training your own mind to notice effort and progress, rather than only noticing distance still remaining. A mind trained to notice progress becomes far more resilient than a mind trained only to notice how far there still is to go. There is also enormous value in sharing small wins with people who genuinely support your growth, the same kind of people discussed earlier as essential to surrounding yourself with. Telling someone you trust about a small step forward, even something that feels minor, does two important things. It reinforces the progress in your own mind through the simple act of stating it out loud, and it invites encouragement from someone whose belief in your ability can strengthen your own belief during moments it feels shaky. This does not mean seeking constant approval from others, but occasionally allowing people who care about your success to witness the process, not just the eventual outcome, deepens both the relationship and your own sense of accountability. It is worth addressing directly why some people resist celebrating small wins, often out of a fear that acknowledging progress will make them complacent, satisfied too early, less hungry for the bigger goal ahead. This fear, while understandable, misunderstands how motivation actually works. Complacency comes from believing you have nothing left to prove, not from acknowledging that today's effort mattered. You can fully celebrate a small win in the morning and return to focused, disciplined effort that same afternoon. These two things are not in conflict. In fact, people who regularly acknowledge their progress tend to sustain effort longer than people who withhold all satisfaction until some distant finish line, precisely because withholding satisfaction indefinitely drains the very energy required to keep working toward it. Momentum is built through repetition, and repetition is sustained through the felt sense that your efforts are actually leading somewhere. Every time you notice and acknowledge a small win, you are strengthening the belief that your daily actions matter, that the path you are on is actually moving, even during seasons when the destination still feels far away. This belief, reinforced day after day through small, honest acknowledgements of progress, becomes the quiet engine that carries people through the long, unglamorous middle of every meaningful goal, the part almost nobody sees, the part where victory is actually being built, one small, celebrated step at a time. Chapter 10. Commit fully to the mission until victory becomes your identity. There is a difference between wanting something and being committed to it, and that difference determines almost everything about whether a person ever actually reaches their goal. Wanting something is passive. It sits quietly in the back of your mind, surfacing occasionally when you feel inspired, fading whenever life gets difficult or a more comfortable option presents itself. Commitment is active. It does not wait for inspiration, does not require perfect conditions, and does not disappear the moment things get hard. Commitment is the decision, made once and then defended daily, that this particular mission matters enough to be carried forward, regardless of how you feel on any given day. Everything covered so far in this journey, the hidden strength inside you, the habits that carry you through setbacks, facing fear, silencing the inner critic, learning from failure, building strong mornings, choosing the right people, pushing through exhaustion, celebrating small wins, all of it exists to prepare you for this final and most important shift. The moment commitment stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Most people fail, not because they lack ability, but because their commitment is conditional. They are committed as long as progress feels visible, as long as people around them are supportive, as long as the timeline unfolds the way they imagined it would. The moment any of those conditions shift, their commitment shifts along with them, and they quietly abandon something they once cared deeply about, telling themselves it simply was not meant to be. But conditional commitment was never real commitment in the first place. It was enthusiasm wearing commitment's clothing, and enthusiasm, as covered earlier, is unreliable precisely because it depends on circumstances outside your control. Unconditional commitment, the kind that survives disappointment, boredom, and long stretches without visible reward, is what eventually separates people who complete meaningful missions from people who simply talked about starting one. There is a story about a woman training for years to compete at an elite level in her sport, facing injury after injury that would have ended most people's ambitions permanently. After one particularly serious setback, doctors told her she might never compete again at the level she had once reached. She had every justified reason to walk away, and no one would have blamed her if she had. Instead, she made a decision that had nothing to do with how she felt in that specific moment. She decided that her identity was not built around whether she succeeded on any single attempt, but around being someone who does not quit on what she has committed to. That identity carried her through years of rehabilitation that offered no guarantee of success, through training sessions where progress was invisible for months at a time, through moments of genuine doubt about whether the sacrifice was worth it. She eventually returned to competition, not because every day felt motivating, but because her commitment had stopped depending on motivation entirely. It had become who she was. This reveals something essential about full commitment. It must eventually transfer from being a goal you are chasing to being an identity you are living from. As long as your commitment lives only at the level of goals, it remains vulnerable to circumstances, moods, and setbacks, because goals are external targets that can be delayed, blocked, or temporarily out of reach. But identity operates differently. Identity does not ask whether today felt productive before deciding whether to show up. Identity simply shows up, because showing up is what this type of person does, regardless of the day's conditions. The shift from "I am trying to achieve victory" to "I am someone who does not stop until victory is achieved," however small that shift sounds in words, represents one of the most powerful transformations a person can make in their entire life. The first practical step toward building this identity is choosing, deliberately and specifically, the language you use to describe yourself, both internally and out loud. Language shapes belief far more than most people realize. Someone who repeatedly says, "I am trying to get healthier," remains in a fragile, uncertain relationship with that goal, one bad week away from feeling like a failure. Someone who says, "I am someone who takes care of my body," has built an identity that a single difficult week cannot easily shake, because one struggle does not erase who a person has decided to become. Begin noticing how you describe your own commitment. Replace fragile, conditional language with firm, identity-based language, even before you fully feel it to be true. Identity is often built through repeated declaration and action, long before it is fully felt as belief. The same way an actor rehearsing a role eventually begins to move and think like the character, not because the transformation happened instantly, but because repetition eventually closes the gap between practice and reality. The second practical step is designing your daily actions so they consistently reflect the identity you are building, rather than waiting for the identity to arrive before the actions begin. Every single action either casts a vote for the identity of someone who follows through, or casts a vote for the identity of someone who gives up when things get difficult. There is no neutral action. Choosing to show up on a day you do not feel like it strengthens the identity of commitment. Choosing to skip without a genuine reason, purely out of discomfort, strengthens the opposite identity. Over months and years, these small votes accumulate into an undeniable pattern, either proving to yourself that you are someone who finishes what they start, or proving the opposite. You are, at every moment, building evidence for the case of who you actually are, and that evidence eventually becomes far more convincing than any thought or feeling could ever be. Full commitment also requires making peace with the fact that the mission will not always feel meaningful in the moment. There will be entire seasons that feel repetitive, unglamorous, even boring, far removed from the exciting vision that first inspired the commitment. This is not a sign that something has gone wrong. This is simply what long-term commitment looks like from the inside. Most of the time, the exciting, cinematic moments of any journey make up a tiny fraction of the actual time spent pursuing it. The rest is ordinary effort, repeated consistently, often without anyone watching or applauding. Learning to find quiet satisfaction in this ordinary effort, rather than waiting for constant excitement to justify continuing, is what allows commitment to survive the long, unremarkable stretches that make up most of any real mission. There will be moments, likely more than once, where quitting will feel like the wise, mature, reasonable decision. Doubt will present itself with convincing arguments. Exhaustion will suggest that rest means stopping entirely rather than simply pausing. Comparison will whisper that other people are progressing faster, more easily, more naturally than you seem to be. In these moments, return to everything you have already built throughout this journey. The strength that has carried you through every previous hard day. The habits designed to survive exactly this kind of resistance. The willingness to face fear rather than avoid it. The practice of learning from failure instead of being destroyed by it. The small wins already recorded as proof that progress has been happening all along. None of these tools were separate lessons meant to be learned and forgotten. They were pieces of the same foundation, built specifically to support this final, defining commitment. Victory, real and lasting victory, is rarely a single dramatic moment. It is the quiet, accumulated result of someone who decided, on an ordinary day, to keep going when stopping would have been easier, and then made that same decision again the next day and the day after that, until the decision stopped requiring conscious effort and simply became who they were. That is the mission ahead of you now. Not a single burst of motivation, but a daily, ordinary, unglamorous commitment, repeated until it is no longer something you do, but something you are. Carry it forward, let it define you, and do not stop, not because stopping is impossible, but because you have decided, fully and completely, that you are someone who does not stop until victory is yours.